Hi everyone, we're back again with this week's lecture topic about audiences. And this week I will share some of my experiences as a journalist in terms of looking for stories, understanding the role of a journalist and who the audiences that you will be serving with your stories, either viewers or readers. So let's just take a look at some of the notes that I have for you. Let's switch screens now. So you're starting to think about what you can be doing for your assessments. Before you start looking at where you can research or look for leads for your stories, let's just think about again what your role is as a journalist. Is your role here to tell a story? Is your role here to educate? Is your role here to entertain? So some questions you can consider when you are searching for places where you can start investigating your topics and write your stories. And also, how do you know your audiences? Through the mediums that you are in touch with, through the mediums that you use yourself, because you yourself are an audience as well. So that's one channel of trying to get to know your audience on social media, on the TV, television content that you watch, or the things that you're scrolling on your smartphone. And of course, the important thing is to always come back to the values that guide us as journalists. What principles are guiding you when you are working on your own story gathering process? So news, to recap, is facts, the truth. There's no fabrication. There's none of your opinion here. Just bear in mind that they need to be truthful. It's not fiction. And who decides what is news? Based on the values that we've covered in our first couple of weeks, we have seen how certain political forces have guided news, how certain economic considerations has made what news is to certain audiences, some social cultural factors, and also at the end of the day, your editors at your newsroom decides how your story is newsworthy for the audience that you are serving. Just a recap, if you remember, we talked about how we report, the two types of reporting. One is reactive, one responds to a particular event that has happened. And one is proactive, maybe coming from a tip that you've heard from a contact, maybe coming from a piece of gossip that you've decided to interview, that you want to investigate in a more in-depth manner. But either way, this is just a broad approach to reporting here. So coming back to remembering your role, put it quite simply, we're here to inform our audience. We're here to also provide some form of education, and we're here to also provide entertainment. I just want to take a look at our first sort of sample. This is a story I did for Yahoo News when I was a stringer or a freelance journalist with them. Part of a media scrum, we had to get in touch with the relatives who lost their loved ones in the sad, tragic accident of MH370. We camped at the airport when the plane was first reported missing, and we had to really look around for reaction. So this is a reactive type of reporting, looking around for family members, and it was one of the more difficult stories to do because you had to approach grieving members of the public to ask them about their emotions, their experience, what they had to go through with the airlines, and when did they last see their loved ones. So it was quite a pretty tough story. Those who had done stories like this, my colleagues and I were quite shaken after even speaking to all these grieving relatives. So the challenges here are obviously the logistics. They are where we had to scrum. If you can see in the photograph, there were dozens of cameras and mics all gathered around the said newsmaker, this bless her soul, this lady who lost her daughter in the flight to Beijing. We had to put our recorders into her face, get the interviews. There's always ethical considerations with that. Is something we can discuss later in the semester. But as a journalist, we had to go and do this sort of technical work. The other challenge was to make sure we got the recording right on our device that is charged. And of course, there was an emotional attachment to it because a lot of us were in tears after even just speaking to relatives who had to go through this incident. So this is a reactive sort of reporting, and this story was designed to inform and really update the public on the developments of what happened to that missing flight. Then you also had other reactive stories. Protests and rallies are some of them. Now, some of you are international students, so if you have even attended or followed certain political movements in your own country, noticing the rallies in your own country and how it's being covered there. So as journalists, in this time here, I was still, I think, working with Yahoo, going down to the ground to cover this birthday rally, one of the many rallies that call for changes in the electoral system, reform in voting rights and procedures to make it more transparent and to follow the democratic process in Malaysia. So we were confronted with obviously all sorts of challenges. The weather was one, technical challenges, logistics, as you can tell, and of course safety, because a lot of us were tear gassed at the end of the day. So this comes part of the whole conflict reporting side of things. We had to report again to inform the public, to update them on which roads were accessible, whether to stay at home, how secure was Kuala Lumpur at the time. This was some years ago, and there were many rallies that happened after that. So this was part of, again, a journalistic role of thinking about public interest first. When we went on the ground to shoot, to photograph, to report all these events that happened in that time. So if you're into conflict reporting, this is an area you will be trained, and you will be given hostile training to be able to see if you're able to take on different sort of challenges in this situation. Other stories that you may also do is election stories are really quite fun. This was done in Sabah, all the way in Borneo, and right down to the east coast of Sampurna, where the political climate is very different, the landscape, culture as well. So we had to cover what voters were feeling, how were they, what their sentiments were for the current ruling coalition. So we went around capturing photos of party banners, collateral, and it coincided with the Sea Gypsies festival called Lepa Lepa, and it was really colorful, completely takes you out of your comfort zone if you're used to the city life, and it was a coastal town. So that's me down there squatting, talking to some voters as we were gathering their sort of opinions and insights to how they were going to vote that election and what they were upset about as taxpayers and members of the public. And that all becomes part of our report to act as a source of information for taxpayers, and also to give Malaysia a taste of what Sabahans actually experience. Most West Malaysians, if you're Malaysian, you would know this. If you're not very in tune with your East Malaysian friends, you may be quite removed from how they experience life over there, from infrastructure to social to cultural and economic considerations. So we were down there for a couple of days to capture what people were saying. And again, coming down to the whole public interest value that journalists hold close to. Now, another story that you may end up doing is also a personality profile. This chap here, he's passed away now. This was the Islamic Party spiritual advisor, Nick Aziz. So for those who are in the know of politics, he may be familiar, but most of your generation may not know him so much. He was a very respected and lauded spiritual figurehead for a very conservative party in Malaysia, and they were ruling. They are still ruling the east coast of Malaysia. So again, those of you from that part of the world may understand this, but it's a very different terrain, as they are governed by Islamic principles, completely different from the west coast of Malaysia. And I'm sure some of you who are in South Asia, or even maybe from the Middle East, will also understand what these Islamic principles are, how gender separation policies are quite popular there, how conservative some of their outlook is on certain businesses like alcohol and tobacco. And so Nick Aziz at the time was leading this party, and it was a real for me, it was a real treat to be able to see and understand his views, as someone who is non-Muslim, and to be able to understand again what the East Coast political terrain is. So this story leaned against towards educating the public about the conservatism in Malaysia. It exists, offering the political knowledge and his political insights on how he was governing his party and how that sort of shaped the political narrative of Malaysia. What challenges there were? Getting there wasn't a real problem. You could fly, you could drive. Getting to Kelantan, which is, if you can Google, it's all the way the other side of the peninsula. But the language was an issue because he spoke in Kelantanese dialect, so we had to work really slowly with my Malay language and working through that. So you may encounter those are the challenges when you're interviewing people for all sorts of stories. Language may be an issue, so just find a way to work around it. Now, come to one of the roles that the readings was talking about in one of our first compulsory readings about media being a watchdog, and whether the watchdog role is still relevant today. And of course it is. This story was about how my colleagues and I investigated the amount of pay or the salaries of certain public commission servicemen were being paid, and this is all through taxpayers' money. And we had to go and look at documents, and we interviewed some people who were willing to share all these actually they're publicly available documents, sift through all of them and prepare. One of the items was an infographic. So we questioned whether public servicemen, public servants, were they being overpaid with taxpayers' money, and their role was to serve the public. So we had a very short analysis on it, and we looked at all the perks and the benefits. Some CEO got some sort of chief executives were being offered as head of public commissions. The challenges here were not really physical in nature, but access to documents were one of them, and access to information. So if you're looking at these sort of proactive stories where you are looking for a lead and you are exercising your role as a watchdog, as a journalist, as a watchdog, you're able to perhaps spend a bit more time digging about what public policies are, how much public money is being spent, again, serving at the end of the day, the interests of members of the public. This was another one that may be of interest to foreign or students studying in universities in Malaysia, looking at providing some sort of information and education about how Malaysia relies on the foreign student intake and revenue from international students. And as those of you who are already paying international prices, you already be aware of, how much differential fees that you're paying compared to the local students. And it's the same all over the world, same in the UK, same in Europe, same in America, down in Singapore and across Asia. Again, this is another way of exercising our watchdog role. We were questioning at the newsroom, we were questioning on how big a gap students have to face in terms of studying in Malaysia as an international students. Not only they had to go through all sorts of complicated visa issues and visa processes, but they had to fork out all these different sort of excess fees or extra fees when they do in fact come to Malaysia to study. So these sort of stories again come back to the proactive reporting side of things. So these are issues that will constantly be talked about in society, and it's something again you can investigate as part of your news gathering. Moving on to, I think, one of the other roles that journalists assumes is to entertain. So here we landed an interview with the Malaysian diver who won some Olympic medals, and I think this was the first bronze medal she got for the country. And it was quite exciting because for Malaysia, it's a big feat, it's a big achievement. It celebrates an extraordinary feat of a fellow Malaysian who is from Borneo. And we managed to arrange for an interview for her to come into the office to do. She also did a podcast with us, and she did an interactive session with people who logged into the Yahoo website. So that was quite a fun journalistic experience. But of course, the challenges were getting access to her, contacting her manager and arranging for the right time, and then setting up the logistic, making sure the recording devices work because it's just one time only. You can't get her again and do a second recording, making sure every technical aspect was being met so that our interview could be recorded well and our report could be produced well as our podcasting and interactive session with her fans and the readers of the site. So it was more light, but it was novel, it was unusual, and it also is human interest because once again, it celebrates something, an achievement for a fellow Malaysian that will, bring on spirit of nationhood and promote sort of goodwill. So it was quite a nice story to do at the time. Another one that I also particularly enjoyed was a trip again to the East Coast, to Kelantan, to see a Kelantanese version of Muay Thai. So it stems from Thailand, this whole kickboxing thing, but we saw a local version of it, and we captured the scenes. This is some of the judging, and that image there is of the Y crew that boxers have to perform. It's quite a spiritual dance that they have to do before every fight to give them good luck. So again, another form of entertainment and a way to also educate other Malaysians who didn't know this existed. It's done quite basic. It was done in a football field, a muddy football field with makeshift tents, and there were food stalls. The atmosphere was very festive. And these young boys who have very little training or they're self-taught, they earn a couple of hundred ringgit if they win a fight. So it's a big deal, and they get really quite badly hurt if they're not trained properly. So challenges to getting this sort of story is, again, logistics, traveling there, making sure your equipment works, making sure you're taking the right notes, and language, and also culture, because it's all the way in Kelantan and it's something different from us in the West Coast. And you may encounter this when you are looking at where you can cover your stories in your own home country, and in Bangladesh, Indonesia, Japan, even in parts of Europe. Are there places where they're completely different from you? And then you may think that it's quite unusual and may appeal to the audiences that you serve in terms of your readers, and you offer certain videos and sort of narratives that your audience may enjoy. So consider that. One other quite fun story that I did mainly from the desk and through interviews was to cover the Malaysian folklore. So everybody loves a good ghost story, and in Malaysia it's no different. So we did a little short piece about the animism in Malaysia and in the Malay culture, folklore and stories about ghosts and ghouls and spirits. And we didn't pluck the information out. Nowhere we spoke to experts who actually do extensive studies on this sector. So it was quite an academic piece, but we got to listen to plenty of ghost stories as well, and maybe also first-hand experiences of people who actually practice in this sector. So it is factual, but it just stems on the mystical, and maybe to an extent there could be some sci-fi element to it as well. But what it purports, it provides, again, a source of entertainment. Not everybody wants to read serious news all the time. People enjoy a good scary ghost story that actually happened, that actually has first-hand evidence of this mystical experiences. So we did the story for that readership. Audiences do love this. And the challenges for this was getting, obviously, access to facts. So we had to look for experts who were into ghost busting, experts who studied Malay or Malaysian folklore in universities, and arranged for interviews and poured through videos and material to produce a piece for an online site. So yeah, yes, last but not least, this was an interesting excursion. If you had followed the news in the last couple of years, the late Kim Jong Nam was, incident here, right here in the airport of Malaysia. He was allegedly assassinated by a group of North Korean spies who used these Indonesian and Vietnamese girls as their proxies. Unfortunately, they were sort of conned into this sort of trick that caused him his death. And here it was for CNN that I freelanced for, and we went right around everywhere to gather this story. It was a tough one because we were waiting outside the mortuary, outside the airport, trying to get a glimpse of the two girls, in lockup. We were trying to get footage for the CNN crew and gather information for the site. We were talking to people at the hotel. We were talking to people at the mortuary to find out when and how, the autopsy report was ready. We were waiting for any glimpse of the North Korean embassy official. So it was really like being in a James Bond show, but covering as a media, it was tiring because you were 24 hours on call. Your phone, you could never turn it off because you never know what new updates you had to go and rush and cover. We also had to stake out, spend hours staking out, sometimes overnight, in the morning, take turns to cover this type of story. So this is again a reactive story to something that happened in the airport of Malaysia some years ago, and where Malaysia suddenly became famous for the wrong reasons, but it was part of a whole political play or alleged political play by the North Korean government at the time. But it was very hard to prove, so the courts had acquitted, if I'm not mistaken, those two girls that were arrested for his murder. Challenges, you can name it. There was logistic, there was access, there was technical. It was an interesting field work for those covering it, but it will make people's career for covering it. But the whole purpose of it was to inform the public that this was happening, to also update the public on the safety and the security of the airport at the time, and to also provide, very transparent information of how the judicial system worked in Malaysia, how the processes of arrests right to the court trials. So reporters have to do those sort of work as well. So that sort of covers the types of many stories that you yourself may do, perhaps not on an international scale, or perhaps on an international scale. Gives you some idea of types of reporting you can embark on. Now find the stories that that people want to read, educate, inform, entertain, and write stories that people cannot get anywhere. So perhaps in your own community, are there stories that you feel that will interest your readers? Who are your audiences in your own communities? Who can you reach out to? Think about your responsibility as a journalist, and think about their needs as a reader or viewer as well. So very good luck with your news gathering. I look forward to reading your stories